Greetings, everyone. I'm Sister Michelle, as you know, and our guest speaker for this, as we start this month of February, is Sister Linda Buck. And Sister Linda is the executive director for a group called Leadership Collaborative. It is a global group, it's an international group, and we'll hear more about that in the future. This month of February, the dedicated topic is the emergent future of religious life. So we're going to hear from a variety of sisters in different countries how they see the emergent future of religious life, because it's never just one vision. It is a collective vision. So we're going to embrace that. And so today, Sister Linda is, from her position as the executive director for a group that is international, she's going to give us an international, more global look at what are some of those characteristics and issues for the emergent future of religious life. So, Sister Linda, thank you and welcome. We're glad you're here.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And yeah, thank you for that introduction, especially about that it's a collective vision, not just a singular vision of any one person. I truly believe that. And I'm going to hopefully be providing my own musings and what I picked up. I kind of collect data in a sense and integrate it or synthesize it, and then it becomes conversations like these. So it's just things that I picked up over the time. I also realize that I am North American centric, so it is from that standpoint as well. Over the last couple of years, I've become more and more aware, though, that when I'm talking to my peers, let's say in Kenya or other countries in Africa or Latin America, the Philippines, all these different areas, there seems to be a lot of threads and synergies in terms of what we're talking about. The context is definitely different, but I'm thinking the threads or the themes are similar, or there's pieces of it. So hold that in mind as I go through this. See if it resonates with your own experience. So I often ask myself, what is the Spirit doing? And we're going to explore some of these ideas of if we can even tell what the Spirit's doing. Sometimes that's a hard thing to really get a hold of. And we'll be talking more about that as well. But I want to just start with this quote by an American writer, children's book writer, Dr. Seuss. And I just love it. I think it speaks to that emergent possibility for religious life, especially for those that are newer and younger. You're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting. So get on your way. So I just love that. So
Yes.
again, hold that into perspective as well. And, what mountain is awaiting you? So I know we need a new lens or a new perspective when we're talking about religious life. And we're going to be looking at this first. So here I am doing something with my computer that's not forwarding the slide. Okay, let me try that again. There we go.
There it is. Yes.
There we go. So technology. So we need a new lens or a new perspective. So we're going to take a look at that and what that might mean. It could be also a shift of heart and mind, if you will. Then we're going to look at about waking up the world. This is Pope Francis's call to us. It's our call at this time. And so we'll explore that. And we will look at how we're moving forward together. How are we moving into this future together, and what's needed for this to happen? And again, these are all ponderings. It sounds like I might know the answer to any of those, and I don't. It's just all the ponderings, and we all have to collectively figure this out together. Okay. So going back to this quote, our mountain is awaiting, so get on your way. What is ours to do at this time? And it's different from generations in the past. Our task for this generation is different from our elders, those that are the generation ahead of us. Every generation has a particular task, and I think it's that generation's task to figure out what that is, and then to act on it. Um, as I was reflecting on this and these three areas, I was thinking about a prayer that I often reflect on. And here are the words: Lord, when I am comfortable, bless me with what is uncomfortable. For the uncomfortable blesses, stretches, and graces me into newness. And
Mm.
so hopefully this dialogue here will help us grow into what is uncomfortable and help to explain it a little bit as well. Okay. So we need to shift into a new perspective, and here's some points I'm going to talk about. We need to shift how we see things or our mindsets. And this can be very challenging to do. There is a lure of how we thought life should be. We have existing property from our congregations. There's different types of community living or community housing that we thought would always be there. I'm generalizing here, but you'll get the picture. Ministries that have always been, and there's so much more. And so how do we adapt to what we thought it would be
Mhm.
to what it is now? And I know in my little over saying 20 years now in this life, nothing has been stable, and flexibility has been the key. And that's not always easy to do. And it's fair to say that our institutions and systems are shifting. We see this in the church, we see it in society, in how family life is. We see it everywhere. And why would religious life be any different?
Mhm.
And I think oftentimes we get into this mentality of things that we know have always been that way. And I give the example of the mother house for my congregation. We've had three mother houses, and what we act as if the current one has always been the mother house. And we don't, I mean, if my congregation was watching this, they say, no, we don't. Well, we do and we don't. It's just what we've known for so long. And we're going through the process now of, in a sense, divesting of it. It's being converted into low income housing for elders, and much needed in our area. So it's a letting go of that. But it was a difficult process, as many congregations are going through those kind of decisions. So if anything, with the shifting nature of religious life and how we respond to it, we're being called to be a countercultural witness to navigating these changes. And this is really our heritage. Think about our predecessors, the shoulders that we stand on, and how countercultural their witness has been and continues to be in many cases in navigating the radical changes that have happened in the world. It's also our call to do this into our present and future. And with all this shifting, I really think a valid question to ask is if our structures in religious life are supporting the shifts. And my bias is not really. I don't think they are. But I don't know what the new structures will look like. I think that's what the emergent future is about. And then how do our congregations need to shift to address the needs of this unfolding future? It's going to look very different for every congregation. And we hear the stories out there of congregations making really difficult decisions about their future, and others continuing on and having new vocations and whatnot. It's going to look different for each congregation. And how do we hold all that in tension? And we'll talk about tension in a minute. So this is just one example of how we might want to or how we can, in a sense, change our mindsets. So when I entered, it just seemed like anybody who was entering, they had the age of like 18 to 19 years old. I entered at 33. So I entered with work experience, a profession, and yet it was as if I was 19 in my congregation.
Mm,
And I hear that from peers as they're entering now in the same kind of age cohort. So I think it's getting better. And I think it has gotten a lot better. However, I use this as an example because I think it's a perfect way of talking about how we need to change our mindsets. Because if it's not the ages of people, it's something else that we're holding on to as a memory of what used to be. So these are statistics for a group that I worked with about 6 years ago. So the statistics really aren't that valid anymore. They would have shifted by now. But I thought this was fascinating. As we look at religious life, the entrance ages are shifting for many, not everybody, but for many. And this could look very different for your congregation. However, it just provides one example. So for those who have been in their communities for between like 41 to 50 years, they're moving towards their golden jubilee. Their age variance within their cohort, their peers in a sense, was 6 years or
mm,
is 6 years. So there wasn't that much generational variance, let's say. So they kind of understood the same framework of their generation. And I often think about world events, what was happening in the world, major world events, they shared that in common. Okay. For those who had been in their communities for 41 to 50 years, so a little bit younger than that last group, their age variance, 31 to 40
there,
years.
yeah.
So if we actually look at this slide, it's between 11 to 40 years, that span. There's a variance of 14 to 15 years. So for those cohorts, they're bridging about 2 decades of difference in their ages. So not a lot still. It's could probably still tap into some of the same world events, understanding some of the cultural phenomena that was happening at that time. However, if we look at the last 10 years,
Mm,
it would be like the last 15 years of those entering, the age variance jumps drastically. It is a span of 28 years. That was shocking to me. I had to change my mindset that there was such a variance in that age cohort. And I was in formation at this time, working in formation. So I really had to adjust my thinking. So think about the difference of life experience within this variance. Let's say the youngest is 20, the oldest would be almost 50 years old. That's a huge, huge difference. So again, the mindset needs to shift in how we view these people. I'm 54 right now. I know my life experience and understanding is very different than someone who's 25 years old. And the 25-year-old has a better understanding of some things that I don't even understand, and especially around technology. I always think of that one area. So this is a mindset shift for our congregations. It can't be assumed that everyone entering today is the same. And again, and this is a gross generalization. I know not everybody would believe that or think that. It's just an example of how we can shift our mindsets.
mm.
I didn't realize I had my animation there. Okay. Here we
Nice.
go. So now getting into some of the details of how do we navigate some of these changes and the shifts. So this comes from a talk for the Leadership Collaborative that was in 2019. And it's a document which I can share with you. It's called Leaders in a Diaspora Moment. And it really talks about like the temple is destroyed. The temple, it's in rubble. We can't recreate it. And going back to the Jewish people when the temple was destroyed. So this idea is that the temple is destroyed and we wander in the diaspora as women religious today. The diaspora is a space of wandering, and historically it is largely identified with the Jewish people who lived outside the land of Israel and began with the Babylonian exile. And then it intensified in 70 CE, Common Era, after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple. So this diaspora has a long history in the Jewish community. So during these diasporic times, Jewish communities were scattered and they wandered for years in search of a new home. And I think that's the key for us. We're searching for something. It might not be a new home, but it's a maybe a different existence or a different way of being present or something like that, or maybe more of an interior home. So during this time for the Jewish communities, it was a time that they needed to shift their religious practices. And it used to be that their religious practices centered around the temple. And we started to see the development of the rabbinic Judaism because they no longer had the temple. So you see a whole conversion of a faith tradition in many ways. Now, I'm not an expert in Judaism, so if anybody is, excuse myself if I'm saying this incorrectly, but I think you get the point. In contemporary times, this idea of diaspora is used in post-colonial studies to really denote the voluntary or enforced of people from their native homelands. And it's often concerned with questions of maintaining or altering identity, language, and culture while in another culture or another country. So diaspora is used for our purposes to denote the wandering space of our time in religious life. And there's perhaps a lure to search for a new home. And we definitely experience the tension of maintaining or altering our identity and culture with that which we've known so well and shifting to what is unknown and what is emergent. So I think for us, the diaspora can be a place of reflection. We had the luxury of that type of space, whereas like the Jewish diaspora and even the diaspora for that's denoted for post-colonial studies, that would not be a place of rest. So I know that I'm taking great liberties here in using that term. So for many, this space in diaspora, it's our home during our journey as women religious. We'll know nothing different. And this wandering and seeking is our way of life. And it's exciting. I get excited about it because of the unknown and what's emerging and what's the possibility. And yet it's also very painful. It's a painful aspect of the current state of religious life. And we'll talk about that as well. For the Jewish people, the temple was at the core of their religious experience. And I just mentioned that. It's where Yahweh dwelled. The destruction of the temple placed the Jewish people into a religious crisis, and the political upheaval moved them out of their homeland into the diaspora. And I think for me, what always strikes me is this religious crisis. I think we're in a crisis as well. So for the Jewish people, they became a wandering people who searched for their home. Their reality forced them to let go of how they worshiped and how they lived. The one thing that remained intact was their sense of community and relationship. So I see in there a lot of parallels with religious life. My hope is that the one thing that would stay intact for us, if nothing else, would be that sense of community and relationship. And so in this diasporic space, we hold the potential for what can be, the possibility of finding a new homeland, metaphorically, and there's a lot of letting go to allow for what needs to emerge. Okay. So the temple was a well-established structure for the Jewish people, as we've already talked about. They were wandering, they were a small group. And again, there's many parallels for us. We are really a small group in the relative scheme of things. And we see our structure shifting, and some may cease to exist, and most will change drastically. And some will remain. Some will remain as they are. But I think most will change or be transformed. And to be clear, the structures have served us well. I just really want to make sure that that is stressed. Women religious, in particular, responded to the needs of the times, serving the gaps in society, and developed institutions that created much needed ministries in education, healthcare, social services, and so much more. And this continues. It is our past and our present. And it will be our future as well. I don't see those going away. Our congregations became institutions in their own right. But I ask, what is God calling us to now? What are we being called to in these times? And I often use, like my congregation, we've been involved in healthcare for a very long time. So I feel I can use that as an example. My example is not always well received by those that are very connected to healthcare. I wonder, like for my own congregation, w- w- the health system it's become something bigger than we are in a sense. I mean, it's an amazing organization. It serves so many people, but it's so technical, especially in the US healthcare. I think every country would be the same. Like I just can't show up and say, I'm gonna run a hospital. And and I don't know actually any of our sisters who could actually say they would do that. So is there though, there's other people who are so much better at that, skilled, and they carry the charism and the mission, I think sometimes better than we do. So they are in it. So what is our call then in that? Is there a gap that's not being addressed in healthcare that we need to respond to? So again, I don't know the answer, but I'm just wondering, what is our call now? We've had developed these amazing institutions, and now what? Are we so needed in those institutions? I really question that. So in our smallness, getting back to that idea, um, I think we're called to lean into that smallness, to be flexible, and to listen and discern. And I want to clarify, I'm not speaking about diminishment. There's that whole diminishment narrative that's out there. There's some realness to that. However, when I mention our smallness, I'm not talking about that. I think we're called to be the smallest of leaven that multiplies into abundance. And for me, this idea, I just love this imagery. And there's an expansive energy to this idea and to this abundance. Even if your congregation has hundreds or thousands of members, you're all over the world, it sounds like. The reality is that religious life is shifting and the church is shifting. So everything will be shifting. Um, everything that we know will be shifting. And Pope Francis has talked about this, about a change of era. And we are consciously experiencing a shift that will be similar to like the Industrial Revolution or to the Renaissance. And I think we're probably the first group that's been so conscious of this. In my understanding, I keep asking people, and no one says that other groups, in eras have been conscious of this. So hopefully that is true what I'm stating. I don't want to, tell tales and not have the truth there. But the great thing is that we can respond consciously, one small step at a time, which I think is very, very exciting, that we can have that awareness and make choices. Out of awareness, choices can be made and discernment can happen. So, and it's also in this idea that, in these shifts in this responding consciously, God is creating something new for religious life. And it's nothing we're creating. We are responding as it unfolds. We're casting our gaze at the horizon, gathering glimpses, and then collectively moving and trying. We're experimenting a lot, or we need to start experimenting maybe more. It's in this collective response that we're risking hope for a future that's unknown. And the one thing that I'm really sure about, it's actually the only thing I'm sure about, is that it will not be what we know today.
Mhm.
So, of course, there will be an essence that remains. Okay. There's a thread that has existed in religious life since its beginning. Gospel values, the gift of charism, our outward focus of prayer and service, our consecration to living the vows, and the communal nature of our life. Those are some of the threads or the essentials that will remain. There could be others. That's just the list I created. However, how these are expressed and lived out has changed throughout history. And this is a quote by Constance Fitzgerald. She's a Carmelite sister in the United States. And I just love it. Our rootedness in history and tradition gave us a strong identity and self assurance so that we had the courage to try new things. And then she asks an important question. Is our fear of loss of identity short circuiting the spirit?
Mm.
Is our fear of loss of identity short circuiting the spirit? I often wonder if we are moving chess pieces around or rearranging furniture in a room, hoping that our action will lessen anxiety around what's happening. Our congregations and the organizations that support religious life create new structures, new ideas, new ways. And yet, I often step back and wonder, are we trying to create and control the future? And again, I don't have any of the answers. Um, History has not stopped. I'm going to read this quote because it really flows nicely into what we're talking about. History has not stopped. The processes of change and transformation remain as dynamic today as ever. The world can only appear monochromatic to those who persist in interpreting what they experience through the lens of a single paradigm, their own. For those with eyes to see and the heart to feel, it remains a rich and complex topography of the spirit. Yeah, and so that was very powerful. And I'm going to share another quote that I think sums up pretty much everything I've been talking about. This is from Anthony Giddens.
Oh,
After, yes, I know, bless his soul.
yes, bless his soul. He was one of our speakers too.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. He's just amazing. Yeah, or was amazing. He continues to be amazing as a saint. After a lifetime of learning just how to think, and then to think that our thinking is right thinking, and even to think that the way we think is actually the way God thinks, we all become rather resistant to thinking differently. To think and act differently often requires less than a radical conversion. I just love that.
Hmm.
And Michelle, if it's helpful, I can give you these slides.
Sure,
Um,
that's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. People might appreciate getting those quotes.
That'd be
Okay.
great.
So I'm going to shift now to Pope Francis, and he called us to wake up the world. Um, and religious life um, ought to promote growth in the church by way of attraction. And he talks about don't walk around with, I think it's like sour faces. I
Mhm.
just I just always have to laugh at that. Um, but religious life, it should promote growth by way of attraction. How are we really attracting people to the church, to Christ, to God? And the church must be attractive. And then he goes on, be witnesses of a different way of doing things, of acting, of living. It is this witness that I expect of you. Religious life should be men and women who are able to wake up the world. So he really calls us to task. And he said this over 10 years ago, and I wonder how we're
Mhm.
doing, honestly. I had to reflect for myself, how am I doing? How am I attracting people? How am I, in a sense, attractive for people to they see something different in me? I wonder if part of our call at this time is how we navigate the changes occurring, how we respond to the extreme political scene in almost every country. I don't think any country is untouched at this point. The consumerism and capitalistic global society that continues to broaden the gap between the wealthiest and the poor. How are we dealing with that? Are we showing that there's a different way? It's also about how we are navigating the changes in our own structures, in our congregations, let's say. How do we witness to a different way of being with one another? How do we wake up? How do we, in a sense, wake up the world to the fact that there is a different way? And so I want to turn to our call at this time. And I'm going to focus on three areas. One is holding the tension, and then radical availability, and then emerging consciousness. We're going to explore these briefly. So holding, holding the tension. I love this quote from Carl Jung. It's the first quote on the slide. The greater the tension, the greater is the potential.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're definitely experiencing a lot of tension in our world today and in religious life. So we have amazing potential that will usher in a new way. And for me, this is God's way. The tension is creating something new. And I'm a big tension person. I believe that out of tension, something new will arise that wouldn't have come together if we didn't have this tension. So to me, that's the spirit working. That's God's work. The work of holding the tension that emerges out of the reality of the dominant system, our current dominant system, that is like this, in a sense, the status quo, and the emergent system takes enormous energy. It also takes a lot of focus, intentionality, and strength. It's difficult to go, in a sense, into the dominant system with anything new. It doesn't want to change, and that's just a social phenomena. So at any times, either system wants to, in a sense, consume the individual or the group and eject what it doesn't see to its benefit. So again, in this dominant system, it's anything that's new. Again, I'm generalizing here. For the emergent system, it can be anything that's old. Okay. So the pull within the tension is to do anything in order to reduce or preferably eliminate, completely get rid of this tension. So I'll give an example. I often think about, and again, this is a gross generalization. I keep qualifying these things. Like, and because I don't think this happens a lot, but it was just a clear example I could think of. The emergent system, so this new system that's coming into being, might discard our elderly sisters as not getting it or not wanting to change. And honestly, I see that sometimes. I see it in even my own peer group of not wanting to change. However, I think sometimes we can tag it on to the elder sisters, and I don't think that's to anybody's benefit, but sometimes that does happen. So this is really an inflation in which the energy of the emergent system establishes a belief system that there's a correct way of moving forward and nothing else matters. So kind of discarding everything and we're just going to move forward. Elder sisters can in reality have a lot in terms of generativity and, in a sense, composting what has gone before. This process is also evident in the dominant system, in which anything new is an assault to the core functioning of the system. So I know as a new sister, 20 years, I've experienced that. It's like anything that I would bring to the table was seen as a disruption, I would say. Um, and again, gross generalization, but that's how I experienced it. I was threatening, in my belief, I was threatening the core functioning of the dominant system.
Mhm.
Okay. So in this tension, it's taken me a while to get here because when it's actually happening, it's hard. In this tension, there's an abundance of energy that can be captured and it becomes a vehicle for something new to emerge. So it's kind of like we need to stay in the conversation with one another. And and that's going to allow something else to emerge. That's a hard call to stay in the conversation with one another. But that's also that countercultural impulse that we can have to show that we are doing something different. So I look at the political system in the United States right now, and many uh, countries have similar dynamics where it's so contentious that the parties can't even talk to each other. Are we the same in religious life? I would hope not. So how can we model a different way? In doing so, though, it is not without personal sacrifice. And that's where we get to this second quote, a scripture reference to the Philippian community. For he has graciously granted you the privilege not only of believing in Christ, but of suffering for him as well. So there is a lot of suffering in what I'm talking about. And we need each other to carry through so we're not so alone. So the second point is radical availability. And so what does this mean? And this is another Anthony Gittens quote. Everyone must be willing to stand and be counted. The future, viable or not, demands and depends on it. So no one's able to take the back seat, if you will, or not to be upfront and be willing to be a part of whatever we're needing to do. Um, Part of radical availability is this first point as well. We're 100% in and at the same time detached. And so there's this paradox of passion and detachment. And to me, it's key. As Paul proclaims, and it's referenced here, regardless of living or dying, we are the Lord's. So Jesus is the embodiment of radical availability through the modeling of his life, as well as his acceptance of death. We must be 100% in and at the same time detached from any one outcome. It is a dying to one's hopes and expectations of where she is going. So we can't hold on to that. We can hold on to our dreams, but we can't make them so strong that there's not any flexibility in them. And we need to be able to hear others' dreams, bring those in, and then allow something new to emerge. And that's that detachment. I can let go of that because I see the bigger picture over here, and I can see where that is the spirit's movement. Each step and each encounter provides glimpses of how to proceed, knowing that something will emerge. However, the end result is not concrete, rather, it unfolds over time. And I think it's that lack of concreteness which is so difficult. I know it would be nice to have a rubric saying this is the first step, the second step, the third step, and life will be really good once we hit that fourth step. And there might be 10 steps after that that we don't even know about. So we just need to hold space, be gentle, and give ourselves a lot of grace in this process. So entering into this process, really, it just takes, it's a lot of challenging moments, and it takes focus, and it calls us to have radical availability. It calls us to that so we can catch glimpses of the signs of the times and discern the next course. over time and with more and more data, the horizon begins to emerge. And I know for myself, over the last probably 10 years, I've been in a very different place where I was, say, 10 years ago, to seeing kind of how I see religious life maybe unfolding now. And it's not so tangible, it's more of a felt sense, but I've seen a shift in myself. So I have more data now. With every year I get more data. With every encounter and connection, I get more data about where we're going. So after radical availability comes emerging consciousness. And here I want to talk briefly about the resurrection. It allows things to be seen differently. Eyes were open to a new reality and a new consciousness emerged. And I think the same is happening for religious life at this time in history. And I'm going to turn to the Emmaus story in Luke 24. Basically, we are walking along the road and discussing what has just happened, and yet we do not recognize this stranger until the breaking of bread, and then life for those sojourners is changed forever. So, Walter Brueggemann, in his book, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it yet, The Prophetic Imagination. Here's a quote that from this book. Jesus is remembered and presented by the early church as the faithful embodiment of an alternative consciousness. In his compassion, he embodies the anguish of those rejected by the dominant culture. And he was also one of those rejected by the dominant culture. And as embodied anguish, he has the authority to show the deathly end of the dominant culture.
Mm.
There is no question that the dominant structures are dying and in a reactive stance. And we're going to see this kind of going back and forth with these kind of being reactive and then some movement, reactive movement. That's a natural way of things to flow. And this is seen not just in religious life. Think of the denial that's happening in some of the congregations that you might know. Some haven't even had conversations or very little conversations about what their reality is right now. And I will get to the diminishment narrative here. Not having those conversations about their numbers. I'm not saying that they have to choose to come to completion or wherever that looks like. It's facing the reality and then making a decision. So it's being conscious of it and going, we want to make a decision to do X, Y, and Z. And we're going to we're going to be 100% attached and 100% detached from the outcome. That's what I would like to see.
Mm.
So again, it's not just seen in religious life, it's seen in governmental structures. Wouldn't that be amazing if our governments could do the same in our corporate structures and in our church structures? And I do think that Pope Francis is moving in this direction with the synod. We'll see what happens though. He's going up against, it's a perfect example of going up against a very dominant culture.
Mhm. Mhm.
And here's the Pope who is trying to change things. And he's getting a lot of resistance, and it's underhanded resistance, and he keeps moving forward. So we'll see where it all lands. And then if we look at ourselves as women religious, we have been thought and behavioral leaders since the beginning. Think of the heritage of your founders or foundresses, early sisters, maybe not so early sisters, those in the last decade that have kind of fought the good fight in a sense. How are we called to continue this legacy at this time in the world as a model of offering something different? How are we called to companion Jesus and be the faithful embodiment of an alternative consciousness? Okay. So I've been talking a lot about kind of tension, and really it's paradox when you have tension. It's this and that and their intention. And sometimes they seem like they're paradoxical. So I obviously like Anthony Gittin. So here's another quote from him. God's invitation in our life's work is to keep God's vision before us. Lest we find ourselves taking the initiative away from God or simply going through the motions of religious life, rather than remaining faithful to authentic religious living. And so when I'm talking about the paradoxes, that's kind of the bend I'm going toward. How do we live authentically religious life? And what would that look like? And I think these three sets of paradoxes are really important. Humility and sense of self.
Mhm.
In society, humility is often seen as kind of the opposite of sense of self. If you have humility, oftentimes it's seen as a weakness. In reality, that's a myth. To foster true humility, one must have a very strong sense of self and a possession of self. It is only then that a personal sense of humility can be authentic. If you don't have a strong sense of self or possession of self, the humility will be, um, uh, I often think of it as kind of false humility, okay? Or putting on a facade, let's say. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Our systems need this as well. So, for a system like a congregation, our congregations are systems. A sense of purpose and a sense of self as an entity is vital. So we couple this with the humility of ourselves to be open and stand in the midst of struggle. It's in the struggle that our ego may become inflated. We get reactive. I oftentimes, probably not a week goes by where I have a reaction to something, and I'm like, "Oh, this can't happen," or "That's," and I have to kind of say, "Oh, wait a second, that's too much ego. That's all about me. It's nothing about everybody else. I'm reacting." So I kind of take that to prayer and I calm down, and then I move into more of this hopefully humility, and hopefully a stronger sense of self and detachment. Again, that's a key, I think. So the depth or this deep sense of purpose and of self will allow the movement forward. So our deep sense of purpose is our call and the mission of God, the mission of our congregations. That is our deep sense of purpose. So if we couple that, that's that kind of that organizational sense of purpose as well. If we couple that with our strong sense of self, it will allow us to move forward. It'll allow us to stay in the tension of the struggle and to be open to the emergent. The next point is strength and vulnerability. And, in most cultures, like you would never see these two words together, or it would be a critique. Vulnerability is critiqued as not being strong. It's a weakness again, similar to humility. Also, in most cultures, many countries, vulnerability is a risky proposition and may lead to harm or death. So, in this paradox, I'm viewing this as a strength and as life giving. So, it's not the concreteness of danger. Okay. Um, Jesus's model, Jesus models the ultimate vulnerability and strength for us. And these two characteristics work in concert as a prerequisite for standing firmly in one's authenticity. So we need to hold that vulnerability actually creates the strength for us. It allows us to strip off that ego and just to be present and real with one another. That's a very vulnerable proposition. The third, and I've talked about this already, this whole idea of detachment and passion. I just think this is a critical paradox. It asks a person to be energized and passionate, 100% in about her journey and what's emerging, finding her role in this and engaging the task. And yet, here's the hard part, not holding on to any one conclusion or reality. And
Mm.
I can talk passionately about this, and I sound like I have the one way I think things should go. So I always try not to sound that way because I don't believe that, but I just get so passionate that it sounds that way, and I know that. But in reality, I often will step back and try to move into detachment. And a core belief of mine is that there are, and you said it at the very beginning, Michelle, there are multiple, in a sense, realities that we all have a piece of the puzzle. We all have a piece of what is going to happen. Okay. So we detach, we listen, we discern together. And this really helps detach ourselves, in a sense, from our ego needs. And it is in this detachment that the emergent is allowed to flourish. If one is too much in the way with her own attachments to ideas, models, and hopes, she will actually promote things that shift reality and hinder movement because it's more about her own beliefs and her ways. It's a manipulation of what is actually happening, and it hinders the spirit's movement. So we really want to be careful about that, as if it's that easy. These are things to be more aware of. Okay, so this is the last piece. Thank you for listening to me for so long already. So, how do we move forward together? So, it's just three very short pieces here. So, what's needed for us to move forward? The first thing to reconcile is that we're creating what we're creating in the present and what we're looking at into the future. So, we need to reconcile that it's about the present and the future. I wrote an article in Global Sisters Report. Oh, it must have been like 2015. And I said in it, if we keep relegating ourselves to the future, how do we create the present? Like we need to be in the present to create the future. So if we're not in the present, how do we create that future that we keep being told that we're going to be about? And this was primarily in reference to younger sisters. Um, because the narrative at that point was like, oh, you're our future, you're our future. But there wasn't a lot of room for us in the present to be around the table. So other people were kind of creating that future, that the present for the future. So that might have been way too confusing. But anyways, hopefully you get what I'm meaning. But how do we can't keep relegating ourselves to the future because we're not then in the present. Okay. So we need collaboration, and that's a given to me. Hopefully it's a given to everybody who's listening to this. The importance of working together is so that something new emerges beyond what any one person or group could have imagined. If we work in silos, we will not move forward. We will become stagnant. So collaboration is key. It also is a wonderful model, a more circular model, non-hierarchical model for how to do things differently, especially for most of us who come from hierarchical structures in religious life as well as in society. The second one is unity in our diversity. Our lives embody the cycle of creating unity out of diversity, and thus we need to move into uncomfortable spaces of diversity and the unknown space of other. How are we listening for this diversity? How do we see and experience being on the margins of religious life? And as a dominant culture white woman who has a lot of privileges in my own culture, in my own country, I think that this is a challenge for me to keep, how do I say it, to not keep recentering whiteness in a sense, as the dominant way, and moving those that have been marginalized by our systems. How do we move those individuals, their ideas, their experiences, their ways more into the center and allow space for them? So unity in our diversity. And then the last is faith, foresight, and flexibility. This comes from my congregation's constitution, and I just love it. And I think it really speaks to what's needed today. So here's what this is a bit modified, but I'll read it. We are called to the heritage of a pioneer spirit of bold faith, foresight, and flexibility as gifts for our mission. And is there anything else that we need for the journey? Really? As women religious, we are pioneers from
Yeah.
day one. Our founders and foundresses um, journeyed and struggled and had to overcome so much, and we continue that. It just looks different. We have traditionally had our own sense of what is needed, where the gaps are, and we work to alleviate those areas that need tending. I was on a hospital board at one point where one of the guys on the board, he would say, if you want to know where to go and where the needs are, just looked at where the sisters are.
Mm.
I just love that. I hope that we can really honor that intention. You know, are we in the right spaces? Are we really gap tenders? So we work to alleviate those areas that need tending, and then we move on to the next task, and so on and so on. There's a maxim also from my congregation. I'm a sister of Saint Joseph, and this is a maxim from 17th century France from our founder. And it's basically do things to their near completion, and then let it go and let others have the glory. Now, I'm not saying that completely correctly. However, the idea is like create the systems, do what's needed, but don't hold on to it. Let others complete it, let others finish it, and take the credit for it in a sense. We don't need to do that. And then let us move on to the next thing and do the same. Okay. So as we continue to have this rich heritage and foster a pioneer spirit, especially as we move into this emergent, and we're already in the emergent, but as we continue to move into it, there's a different type of terrain for the pioneer. And we need to have this bold faith. We need faith more than ever, knowing that God is at work, even if we do not quite understand what that means, or what that work is. There's mystery in that. We need to have foresight, similar to looking beyond the horizon for land. We're constantly kind of looking out there, seeing what's happening. And we need to have flexibility in order to shift course as needed, not to become too rigid that we can't move beyond what we've thought should be. So in conclusion, I just want to go back to this idea of the temple. The temple is destroyed. What we've known about religious life metaphorically is destroyed. Okay. We cannot return to what has been. And we too understand that religious life is not the same as it was even a decade ago. It's changing so rapidly. What has been is being deconstructed, and we are moving already in this diaspora space. We have work to do in order to transform and increase our consciousness of this dynamic at hand and where God is leading us. And we need to do that together. This past weekend, the Leadership Collaborative hosted a gathering of, it was about 150 sisters under 65 in person in Chicago in the United States. And then I think about 150 or more virtually. And it was global. And the whole conversation was about how are we risking hope? How are we building bridges? And the whole event was Hope Esperanza. So how do we work together? The conversations were amazing, and we're already hopefully planning the next one. Um, and we'll get you information on that when it's available. Hopefully, we want a lot more people in the conversation because everything that I've talked about here is what that gathering is about. And we need to be in conversation. We need to talk with one another so we can really harness God's energy and where the Spirit is moving us. So our journey is grounded in God. We know the work of God is at hand, and we seek to be partners with this divine energy. And I'm so privileged to be in the position I am because that's what I get to witness and hopefully provide platforms for. So we can tap into that energy, God's energy. And with this partnership with God, we can journey together and we can seek a glimpse at the horizon. And I often envision all these different boats in the ocean, all coming from a different perspective. And we're all looking over that horizon and seeing that land emerge. Um, and to me, that's an exciting imagery or metaphor that holds potential for our future. So thank you so much. Please stop sharing the screen now. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, that was marvelous. You know, Sister Linda, you had so many um, opportunities for metaphors to think on, challenges, looking at our own lives and saying, you know, we weren't called to be in structures and to preserve those structures forever and ever. We were called to be out and with the people. That's part of the apostolic piece. Thank you so much. You've given us much to chew on, much to think about, and much to take to our retreats. Oh my gosh! So thank you so much. We really appreciate um, your vision, your expertise, your wisdom that you have just brought to us from a weekend in which you were with many people, about 300 some people, who really shared about the future, the emergent future of religious life. So thank you. We really appreciate it. And that ends our presentation for today.